May 5, 1945, the Austrian Alps. For in the morning, a man is pressed flat against a cold stone wall. Rifle up, breathing controlled. Listening, he is American. The man beside him, reloading in the dark, is German. They don't speak. They don't need to. Somewhere down the mountain road, boots are moving through wet gravel. Hundreds of them. Getting closer. The SS is coming. And the only people standing between them and an execution are 14 Americans, 10 Germans, and a handful of unarmed French prisoners who have nowhere left to run. History never wanted you to know this story because it destroys every clean narrative the war tried to build. And the man who held that castle together died before he ever knew if it worked. Forces were rolling through Austria like a flood. German soldiers were surrendering by the thousands every single day. The war had maybe a week left in it, maybe less, but nobody told the SS that. Or maybe they knew, and they didn't care. In the final days of dying empires, the most dangerous men are the true believers. The ones who would rather burn everything to the ground than admit they lost. And in the Austrian Alps in the first week of May 1945, there were still plenty of those men left. They had orders. Execute the prisoners at Castle Itter before the Americans arrived. No witnesses, no survivors, no loose ends. The prisoners had no idea how close the end was, for the war, or for them. Castle Itter had been standing since the 1300s. 600 years of stone and silence in the Austrian mountains. The Nazis had converted it into a high-security prison in 1943, but not for ordinary people. The prisoners inside Castle Itter were the kind of people empires keep alive as insurance. Former French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier, the man who signed the Munich Agreement. Former Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, who led France when it fell in 1940. General Maxime Weygand, once the supreme commander of the entire French military. General Gustave Meany, a decorated combat veteran. Marie-Agnes Callio, the sister of Charles de Gaulle. And Jean Barotra, a Wimbledon champion, one of the most famous athletes in France. These were not random prisoners. These were trophies, living leverage. People the Reich had kept breathing because dead hostages have no value. But by May 1945, the Reich had nothing left to negotiate, and a hostage with no value is just a loose end. The order came down from SS command: kill them all, before the Americans get there. But then something the SS never accounted for happened. A German officer decided he wasn't going to let it. Josef Gangl was not supposed to be a hero. He was a Wehrmacht artillery major, a career soldier who had fought for Germany on the Eastern Front, who had worn the uniform, followed the orders, done what soldiers do. But somewhere in the blood and ice of the Eastern Front, something in Gangl broke open. He had seen what the SS did to civilians, to prisoners, to anyone who got in the way of the ideology, and he had made a decision that could have gotten him shot on the spot. He started working against his own government. For months before Castle Itter, Gangl had been quietly feeding intelligence to the Austrian resistance, helping coordinate surrenders, passing information to advancing American units, doing invisible, terrifying work in the shadow of a regime that executed men for less. When word reached him through resistance channels that the SS was moving toward Castle Itter with execution orders, Gangl didn't hesitate for a second. He needed an American, fast. Captain John Lee was exactly the kind of man you want when a situation stops making sense. Lee commanded a small armored unit of the 12th Armored Division, pushing through the Austrian countryside in the war's final days. He was the kind of officer who moved first and filed the paperwork later. The kind of man who trusted his gut when his gut said move. When a message came through resistance channels that a German major wanted to talk, that French prisoners were about to be executed, that he needed American help right now, Lee didn't sit on it. He went. Picture that meeting for a second. An American tank commander and a German artillery officer, sitting across from each other in a farmhouse in occupied Austria. The smell of coffee and gun oil in the air. Both men exhausted. Both men knowing the war was almost over. Both men understanding that what happened in the next few hours would decide whether a group of people lived or died. Gangl laid it out flat. Castle Itter, French prisoners. SS execution order. Coming fast. Lee looked at him, looked at the map, looked at what he had available. One Sherman tank, a handful of soldiers, and a German officer he had met 20 minutes ago. He said yes. The trap was set. The night was cold. Nobody slept. The small convoy moved toward Castle Itter before dawn. Americans and Germans in the same column, moving through the same mountain roads, toward the same enemy. Inside Lee's head the math was not good. He was moving his people into a medieval fortress with one tank, against an SS force whose size he didn't fully know yet, with no guaranteed reinforcement, no air support, no artillery backup. There was a moment on that road, there had to be, where the weight of what he was doing settled fully on him, where the point of no return became visible in the headlights, and he kept driving anyway. That is not a small thing. That is everything. They reached the castle at first light, made contact with the prisoners. Barotra immediately grabbed Lee's hand and volunteered for anything. Weygand was frail but sharp. Daladier and Reynaud were still arguing with each other inside a prison they were both about to die in. Lee had no time for any of it. He started placing his people, Americans on the towers, Wehrmacht troops on the flanks and the gate, prisoners carrying ammunition where they could. Barotra signed as a runner. The castle walls were thick. The position was defensible. But defensible only means something if you have enough people. And Lee did not have enough people. He radioed for reinforcements, sent runners toward American lines, and waited. They didn't have to wait long. The SS came out of the tree line in force. Over 100 men. Some accounts say closer to 150. Waffen-SS veterans. Hard men who had been fighting for years and had not accepted that it was over. Anti-tank guns, heavy machine guns, mortars. They came up the approach road toward the castle gate, and they saw the American flag on the tower. For 1 second, maybe 2, there might have been confusion. The image in front of them didn't compute. Americans on the walls, Germans standing right beside them. Then the first shot cracked through the mountain air, and the battle started. The first shells hit the castle walls like hammer blows. Stone cracked and dust filled the air. The smell of burnt gunpowder mixing with cold mountain mist and wet wool. Every explosion inside those walls was amplified, louder than it should have been, stone throwing sound back at you from every direction. Americans on the towers opened up with everything they had. Wehrmacht troops below called out SS positions and shifted to cover the flanks. When an American gun ran dry, a German soldier pushed a fresh magazine through without being asked. When a Wehrmacht position got suppressed by machine gun fire, an American moved to cover it. No orders needed. No translation required. They had been in enough firefights to know what the person next to them needed before they asked. The Sherman tank besotten Jenny rolled out and engaged SS anti-tank positions, trading fire at close range, taking hits, the hull ringing like a bell with every impact, giving hits back, until a direct strike finally knocked the engine out and left her dead in the road. Now they had no armor, no air, no artillery, just stone walls and personal weapons, and the burning need to hold until help arrived. And then the moment came that nobody who has ever heard the story has forgotten. Somewhere in the middle of the 6th hour of fighting, in the smoke and noise and chaos of a battle that had been grinding for longer than anyone's body was designed to sustain, General Gustav Meany moved into the open courtyard. He was exposed, completely visible from the SS positions outside the walls. A clear shot for any sniper with a line on the gate. Josef Gangl saw it happen. Think about what was going through his mind in that fraction of a second. He was a Wehrmacht officer. Meany was a French general. 6 months ago, they would have been enemies by definition. 3 years ago, Gangl had been fighting a war that Meany's army had lost. None of that registered. Not one bit of it. What registered was a man standing exposed in a courtyard, and a bullet already in the air. Gangl moved. No calculation. No hesitation, no moment of weighing what his life was worth against what Meany's was worth. He put his body in the way. He took the bullet, a sniper's round, clean and instant. He hit the stones of the courtyard and didn't get up. Josef Gangl, Wehrmacht major, Austrian resistance operative, the man who had crossed every line that the war had drawn between people, died in a German uniform, protecting a French general, alongside American soldiers, in a medieval castle in the Austrian Alps. 17 minutes later, elements of the 12th Armored Division broke through from the valley below. The SS attackers, now caught between the castle defenders and a fresh American force coming hard from behind, folded fast. Some surrendered. Some ran into the mountains. The attack collapsed. The shooting stopped. The smoke began to clear, and the courtyard of Castle Itter went quiet for the first time in 6 hours. Every prisoner survived. Every single one. Captain Lee was wounded but alive. Barotra was already shaking hands with the reinforcements. Daladier and Reynaud were, reportedly, still arguing. And in the middle of the courtyard, Josef Gangl lay where he had fallen. The war ended 4 days later. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 9, 1945. Josef Gangl was posthumously decorated by both Austria and Germany. Streets were named for him. A school carries his name. A man who spent the last year of his life quietly dismantling everything he had been ordered to build. Captain Lee went home, and for the rest of his life, he made sure people knew what happened at that castle, because he understood something important. This story makes people uncomfortable, not because it's violent, but because it's human in a way that war propaganda can't absorb. The SS came to Castle Itter to commit murder in the name of an ideology. Clean, simple, final. They were stopped by something the ideology had no category for. A German officer who decided French prisoners were worth dying for. An American captain who trusted a German major he had known for 20 minutes. Wehrmacht soldiers who reloaded American weapons without being asked. An old tennis champion who jumped castle walls to carry messages through a firefight. None of that was supposed to happen. None of it fit the rules. And all of it was real. The last battle of World War II in Europe was not fought between enemies. It was fought by men who looked at each other across the deepest divide the modern world had ever created, and chose to stand on the same side of it. Josef Gangl didn't live to see the castle hold. He didn't live to see the SS break. He didn't live to see the war end 4 days later. He just moved, took the bullet, and fell. Some men spend their whole lives trying to figure out what they stand for. Gangl answered that question in about half a second. That's the whole story, and it's enough.